knelt down to pray, but your heart is still besieged by worldly anxieties? You want to talk to God, to feel His presence, but your mind keeps drifting from bills that need paying, unfinished work, to plans for tomorrow? It seems like there is an invisible wall separating you from God. You yearn for a response from the Most High, but only hear silence. Is it that God has not listened? Or is it that you have not truly entered into His presence? C.S. Lewis, the great Christian thinker of the 20th century, once warned in the Screwtape Letters, prayer, even the barest attempt to raise one's mind to God, is an act of rebellion against the whole of nature. That statement contains an astonishing truth. Every time you kneel down to pray, an invisible but fierce battle is taking place. You are not only struggling with your own distractions, but also facing an evil force that does not want you to approach God. The devil is not afraid of superficial, perfunctory prayers, but it trembles when you truly enter into the presence of God. When you pray with a sincere and powerful heart, from the very beginning, prayer has always been a battlefield, not only in the human mind, but also in the spiritual realm. In the book of Daniel, we see a clear picture of this battle. Daniel did not just pray as a habit, but he prayed with a strong faith, an unwavering heart, despite the danger lurking. When his enemies sought to destroy him, they did not directly oppose his faith, but sought to cut off his prayer. Satan does not necessarily have to make you renounce God immediately. As Lewis wrote, "The safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts." The enemy knows that if it keeps you busy, distracted, or doubtful about the effectiveness of prayer, it has succeeded in separating you from the source of spiritual power. But Daniel did not let that happen. He continued to kneel and pray 3 times a day, as he always did, despite the decree forbidding it from King Darius. And then he was thrown into the lion's den. But God rescued him because his prayer was not just a ritual, but a real connection with God. But not everyone can pray with true power. Prayer is not simply uttering words in front of God. It is a spiritual connection, the breath of faith, and the path for us to enter into His presence. However, there are 2 ways that people often pray: praying in the flesh and praying in the spirit. These 2 forms have a clear difference, and that difference determines whether your prayer has power or not. Praying in the flesh is when your mouth speaks to God, but your heart is still full of worries, private plans, unrelated thoughts. You may read long, repetitive prayers by habit, but your mind is still wandering among the unresolved issues of life. C.S. Lewis once warned about this. We can ask God for anything we like, but unless we really desire what we ask, our prayers will be dead. This is like a person talking to you, but constantly looking at his watch, or like a person standing before God, but his mind is still preoccupied with work, family, money, or nameless fears. When praying in the flesh, you may say many words, but that does not mean you are truly connected with Him. C.S. Lewis's warning reflects a truth. If prayer does not come from a sincere heart and is not fully directed towards God, then it is only an empty form, a religious obligation that does not bring spiritual power. Jesus once said to the Pharisees, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." Matthew 15:8. Prayer is not a ritual to be completed to fulfill a responsibility, but a true encounter with the living God. But praying in the Spirit is different. When you put down all your worries, no longer try to control the situation, but let your heart be completely directed towards God, you will find that prayer is no longer an obligation, but becomes a joy, a liberation. You are no longer weighed down by the burdens of the world, but are lifted up in the presence of God. The Apostle Paul taught in Ephesians 6:18, "Pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests." This means that prayer is not just a human action, but a combination of our spirit with the power of God. When we enter into true prayer, we are no longer limited by the material world, but are operating in a higher spiritual dimension, where the peace, wisdom, and guidance of God become clearer than ever. C.S. Lewis once said, in Mere Christianity, "Prayer doesn't change God, it changes me." When we pray properly, it is not that we are trying to persuade God to do our will, but to let our souls be transformed according to His good will. This means that prayer is not a list of requests that we bring before God, but a living communication, a conversation between man and the Creator. Look at the example of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was the moment He was facing extreme pain, knowing that He was about to suffer on the cross. He prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me." But immediately afterwards, He added a prayer full of surrender. "Yet not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. This is the pinnacle of praying in the Spirit, not trying to force God to do what you want, but to completely surrender your heart to His plan and sovereignty. How to pray effectively. First of all, you need to realize that prayer is not simply a repetitive religious act, but a real spiritual battle. When you kneel down to pray, you are not only talking to God, but also facing invisible forces trying to hinder you. This is why sometimes, the moment you start to pray, distracting thoughts appear. You remember unfinished work, the phone rings with an unexpected message, or your body suddenly becomes tired and sleepy in an inexplicable way. This is not a coincidence. It is a battle. C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, exposed the enemy's strategy. The devils do not need to make you deny your faith immediately. They only need to distract you enough so that you cannot pray seriously. This is the subtle trick that the devil uses to diminish the power of prayer. It does not directly forbid you to pray, but makes your prayer become superficial, forced, and lacking a true connection with God. When you kneel down but your mind is caught up in worries and unfinished work, the enemy has succeeded in weakening the relationship between you and God. So how to overcome this? First, you need to pray with absolute concentration. Prayer is not a mechanical habit, but a true encounter with the Almighty. Eliminate distractions. Turn off your phone, find a quiet place, and clear your mind before entering into prayer. C.S. Lewis, in Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, describes prayer as a personal conversation with God, where there are not only words spoken, but also listening from within the soul. If you find it difficult to concentrate, take a moment of silence, breathe deeply, and let your heart calm down before starting. This helps you to leave behind the distractions of the world and completely focus your mind on the presence of God. Second, pray with faith. In James 1:6-7, the Bible teaches, "But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt." Faith is the foundation of an effective prayer. But faith does not mean that God will answer everything you ask for immediately in the way you expect. As C.S. Lewis once said, faith is not believing that God will do what we want, but believing that He will do what is best for us. Some prayers are answered immediately, but there are also prayers that need time, because God is not only concerned with what you want, but also concerned with your spiritual growth. Waiting in prayer is not a sign of rejection, but an opportunity for you to learn to trust in His perfect plan. Finally, pray in surrender. Jesus, right before suffering on the cross, prayed the most powerful prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Luke 22:42. This is the pinnacle of prayer, not to persuade God to do our will, but to let us be transformed according to His will. C.S. Lewis also once said, "We know that our prayers are effective, not because we receive exactly what we ask for, but because we are transformed through that prayer." Perhaps you have knelt down to pray countless times, have offered to God your deepest concerns, but the sky seems silent. Maybe you are earnestly asking God to intervene in a situation, a relationship, a problem that you have carried in your heart for many months, even years. You ask yourself, does God hear me? Does God care about me? Why hasn't He answered? But do you know, C.S. Lewis once said, "We know that our prayers are effective, not because we receive exactly what we ask for, but because we are transformed through that prayer." That means the highest purpose of prayer is not only for circumstances to change, but for ourselves to be transformed. When we kneel down to pray, we do not only come to God to seek an immediate solution for our problems. Prayer is not a transaction where we make a request and expect to receive an answer immediately according to our wishes. Prayer is a spiritual journey where the human soul is forged, the human will is molded to fit the good and perfect will of God. C.S. Lewis once said, "Prayer doesn't change God, it changes us." When we pray, God not only listens to the words we say, but He also works deeply within us. He reshapes our faith, cultivates patience, and teaches us what it means to fully entrust ourselves to Him. Perhaps at this moment, you have not received an answer, but that does not mean that God is silent or has forgotten you. Jesus said in John 5:17, "My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working." God is always acting, even when you do not see it, even when you do not understand His plan. Some prayers are answered immediately, but there are also prayers that God lets us wait for, not because He is slow, but because He wants us to learn to rely on His perfect timing. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, "I pray because I can't help myself. I pray because I am helpless. I pray because the need flows out of me all the time, one day and night. I pray not to change God, but to change me." Remember the story of Abraham? God promised him that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as the sand on the seashore, Genesis 15:5. But Abraham did not see that happen immediately. He had to wait 25 years for God's promise to be fulfilled when Isaac was born. If Abraham had given up hope in God just because he did not see results immediately, then human history would have changed. But he persevered, and God kept His word. Waiting is not a sign of rejection, but a part of God's perfect plan. Sometimes He uses waiting to test our faithfulness, to see that we seek Him for Himself or only for the things we desire from Him. A mature faith is a faith that can say, like Job, "Though He slay me, yet will I hope in Him." Job 13:15. Perhaps you have knelt down to pray for many months, even years, for a problem that your heart is always troubled with. Perhaps it is an illness that has not been healed, a door that has not been opened, a dream that is unfinished, or a promise that you are still waiting for fulfillment. You have come to God in earnestness, offering Him tears, cries in the darkness, but the sky seems silent. You ask yourself, does God hear my prayer? Does He care about me? If He loves me, why doesn't He answer immediately? When you learn to surrender to God, not trying to force Him to do your will, but trusting in His plan, you will realize that peace does not come from having an answer immediately, but from knowing that God is always in control. Jesus taught in Matthew 6:8 that your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. This means that even when we do not see the answer, God is still working. He never ignores the tears of His children. never turns a blind eye to desperate prayers, but he answers in the best way, at the most perfect time, according to the optimal plan he has predetermined. God is never silent with his children. He is not a distant, indifferent, or insensitive God. He always listens, always acts, and always does what is best for those who place their trust in him. As C.S. Lewis once said, "When we come to God, we do not come to change him, but to let him change us." So now, the question for you is, will you continue to pray in the old way, or will you change and enter into the true presence of God? Are you ready to pray as a spiritual warrior, no longer distracted, no longer doubting, but completely trusting in God? If you truly want to see change in your life, start today. Do not let the enemy discourage you. Do not let waiting make you doubt. Continue to pray, not with your lips, but with all your heart. For powerful prayer is not in the beauty of words, but in absolute surrender before the Almighty. Do not just pray, pray powerfully. For Jesus did not just speak, he acted.